Welcome to Inside Human Capital, presented by Connex Partners and Sabretooth.
Hi, and welcome to the C-Suite Edge, Inside Human Capital. I'm your host, John Light. I'm also the CEO and founder of Sabretooth Recruiting. And today I've got a real treat with me. I'm joined by Diane Headley, the CPO at the Ford Foundation. Diane, thanks so much for joining me today.
Thanks for having me, John.
You know, it's so exciting. Since I partnered Sabretooth and Connex Partners to produce this podcast, I've met so many intriguing, interesting people. Did not have it on my radar that somebody from a prestigious organization like Ford Foundation would be joining me, because it's not the normal. It's not, a for-profit company that's making widgets or building infrastructure. You guys are involved in so many things, and I imagine it leads to a lot of unique challenges and situations you run into. So maybe you could share with us and with the audience as we get started, Diane, a little bit about you and what you're doing today for Ford Foundation.
Right. Thank you. So I am Diane Headley, as you've said, and I grew up in Jamaica. And I think that's an important part of my story because it feeds into who I am today, obviously, and how I manage. And I moved to the States when I went to college, moved back home, worked there for a few years, and then decided to move back to the United States and fell into the world of philanthropy. And I've been not with the Ford Foundation the entire time, but I've been in the world of philanthropy for many, many years.
Philanthropy is it's such an interesting space, I think, because on the outside looking in, if you haven't had your toes in those waters, so to speak, it's just different. It's different from everything you normally see because, I don't know, it's just different. You're giving money away, and you're supporting causes and you're doing all these things. So let me ask you this, because I know you have a lot of the same challenges any organization does, but when you look back in your experience designing and implementing cultural systems, people systems for organizations like this, how do you think organizations should generally approach creating workplaces that bring more efficiency, more innovation, and more support for their team members?
So, well, I have a lot to say on this topic, so let me dive in. I think that for foundations, for the most part, and the saying is, if you've seen one foundation, you've seen one foundation. But I think one thing that we do have in common is that because of the kind of work that we tend to do, right? And for Ford specifically, social justice work, for me, it's really important that the internal culture is reflective of the work that we're doing externally, right? And because I don't want our staff to feel dissonance, between the work that we're supporting externally and then they come in an internal environment that is not supportive of their work. And so, we live in a world that is fast moving. We're constantly needing to adapt, to innovate, and to, in order to remain relevant and successful. And that's all organizations, not for profit and for profit. And I think one mistake that organizations make is treating efficiency and innovation and a supportive culture as competing priorities. No, I think that we assume that if you focus on supporting people, the work suffers. And I think supporting people is a part of the work. What we've learned at Ford is that we can't separate the two. Too often organizations rely on what I call the unfair ask, which is setting high expectations for performance without creating a culture that enables that high performance, right? And all while operating with broken processes and fragmented systems. They expect employees to figure it out and magically deliver. And so when I talk about a supportive culture, I don't mean coddling staff. I think that's where people's minds to go.
Right.
For me, it means intentionally hunting down unproductive friction, which is where there are roadblocks that force people to invent workarounds in order to do an outstanding job. I don't believe that people come to work to do a mediocre job. I think that organizations become hero dependent and
Mhm.
reactive, relying on a few individuals who know how to work around the system to get things done. And that shouldn't be the case. And I don't think that's fair to the majority of staff. So at Ford, we recognize that true workplace excellence relies on alignment between our systems, our culture, our operations, and our people. And supporting your staff isn't a trade-off. It actually is what unlocks creativity and innovation.
I would love to explore this concept because I don't think I've heard somebody say it the way you just said it.
Mhm.
That innovation, efficiency, and supporting your employees are not exclusive. They're not competitive or competing in a competing or adversarial relationship in the organization.
Mhm.
Because I think that's very interesting way to put it. Because I think you're exactly right, but a lot of people go to, and then you addressed it, which kudos to you for addressing it. We're not talking about coddling people. We're not talking about, kowtowing to somebody who, well, I don't feel like it today or whatever. Everybody's got work to do. Everybody has to do the job. We're all should be aligned with mission, like you said. But this idea that if you want more innovation and more efficiency, you need to create the context and the environment in which people are more likely, have a higher probability of delivering it. Is that what I'm hearing correctly?
That's exactly right. Making sure that we're not unintentionally setting up hurdles for staff to
Hmm.
do an outstanding job. Um, Making sure the environment enables outstanding and that outstanding is not the exception. Um, it's kind of a rule, right?
Hmm.
And of course, I think that that goal is always moving because systems become outdated. Things change in the world around us, as I said before. And so it's not a static thing. Like you don't get to excellence or outstanding and then you can breathe a sigh of relief and stop.
Right.
There's always hunting, thinking, figuring out what's working, where are things not working, which I think is the more important question.
Hmm.
And I think in order to get there, you have to create a culture of trust. And you have to equip folks
Hmm.
with the tools and the skills that they need in order to create a culture of trust.
There's something interesting in here that popped in my head. Number one is another phrase you said that you hunt down friction. Um, I like that kind of aggressive sound. I hunt down friction. What do you do for a living? I hunt down friction.
I hunt down friction. Yes.
And then I have this picture of some guy on the side of the road with a broken down car and a can of WD-40. I'm hunting down friction, and I'm hitting it with the lubricant or whatever. Sorry, my brain thinks in pictures sometimes, right? Um, but when we talk about employee support,
Mhm.
okay, and I don't want to keep it too high level. I'd like maybe if we could dive into an example where we could talk about this and explore it for a moment. We don't have to. We can change the names to protect the innocent and the guilty and all that stuff. But how would you define that? Let me give an example. Well, you guys should do a better job, and I'm being a little facetious with this. You guys are doing a better job, so we're gonna put a ping pong table and have pizza every Friday brought in the office.
Mhm.
Or I had a client a number of years ago, big multinational conglomerate, and you couldn't go to the restroom without carting in and out of a door, not to the bathroom itself, but just to get into the hallway. They knew where you were like every minute of every day. And to me, that is not a high trust environment, number one. And number two, you get X number of amount of PTO per year, but people have other concerns in their lives that are going on. Like right now, for a lot of people in the United States, school's starting K through 12, kindergarten through 12th grade. And, I've got a couple of boys who are doing two-a-days getting ready for football in Texas, which you know is a quasi-religious experience around here in the state. And, we've had to be flexible. And, how do you balance those things out in a way that the employee knows that leadership and organization has their back for things that are important to them, not just important to the mission for the organization, but important to that individual?
Well, I think you hit on an important point there. Trust goes both ways, right?
Yeah.
So if you want an employee to trust the organization, you have to trust the employee, right? Like I said, I don't think people wake up in the morning and say, I'm going to do a mediocre job today. I think people,
What a terrible way to wake up in the morning.
right? I think people really want to do a good job. They want to at least have an opportunity to do a good job. And I also think that we are dealing with grown people in work environments, and we should trust them to be able to get the job done. That's what we should focus on, not how much time necessarily that they're spending at their desks at the
Uh-huh.
computer, but giving them the flexibility to get the job done while we know that all of us have other lives outside of the four walls, right? And so recognizing that and allowing that space to do the job and also tend to your life.
Yeah, because work is part of our lives, right? Whatever it is we're doing, whether we're in the nonprofit and a philanthropy space like you are, or if we're in, for profit, working at Apple, or we're working at, name any company out, we start our
Mhm.
own business. It's part of how we define ourselves, I think. And from a personality perspective, a psychological perspective, nobody wants to think of themselves as untrusted,
Right.
or the extension of that is being untrustworthy,
Hmm.
right? And I don't know how to quantify that in a corporate setting. Hey, well, we're paying you X amount per year. So when you're here for your 40 hours or whatever the number is, we expect bit, 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 bit. And we're going to track it and we're going to make sure we extract the value out of you as an employee. I don't know that I would work well in an environment like that personally. I think I left behind getting treated like I was in junior high school and junior high school.
Yeah,
And
exactly. And I think the, you know, the workplace was set up. I think what we haven't evolved very much from the industrial revolution phase, right? Where we were in factories and there was this thinking that we needed to be supervised every minute of the day. That there's still some of that thinking in our workplaces, and I think, but even going beyond that, I think that um, you know, going back to trust going both ways.
Mhm.
If you set up that ping pong table that you mentioned and your staff don't have time to use the ping pong table because they're in meetings all the time and they're overwhelmed and there's workload issues and so on,
Yeah.
that's not going to build trust in an organization. That's like, that's cosmetic.
Mhm.
And I also think that giving folks the skills, the workplace is one place where we don't choose who we engage with and how we engage. We're
Mm.
brought
Yeah.
together with other people who are very likely different from us. And we have to figure out how to work with them to get work done, to get a particular outcome. Everywhere else that I can think of, we can choose whether or not to engage, and we can choose how we engage, right? And so when you bring people together to work, to get things done, to achieve something, one um, significant unfair ask is that diversity. And how do we work together to get things done when we
Uh-huh.
know we are all very different? And so what we've done at Ford is we've taken a step back and we've started a couple of years ago with managers, because managers have the biggest impact on the population, right?
Mm-hmm.
And not high up leadership necessarily, but middle management. Um, we've taken a step back from technical training, let's say, and we said, we're engaging with difference all the time in the workplace. How do we do it in a way that enables us to get the work done? And we did an assessment. I won't name it, but we did an assessment that really looks at how one engages with difference. Do we deny that there's difference there? Do we judge? Do we go towards what we have in common? Do we see that they're different, but we don't know what to do with it? Do we engage with curiosity? And at a minimum, what doing that assessment has enabled for those staff members who did it because it was voluntary, is an awareness of what your typical reaction to difference is. So when I first did the assessment, my typical reaction to engaging with difference was the same as 67% of the people who do that assessment, which is I lean into where what I have in common with you. And
Mm-hmm.
it's not a bad thing. It's very useful in some situations, but it doesn't work in all situations. And what I did was I focused on actually going in with curiosity. And I'll give you an example. I had a staff member. I wanted her to do something. She was resisting in my mind. And after 4 conversations where I kept saying, and in this case, I was not leaning into, I was not in my default. I was actually judging. I was, why isn't she doing this? This is,
Mm-hmm.
and I finally said, what is your concern? Because I think we're coming at this from different approaches. And she told me, and then we were able to find a third way. We were able to find middle ground, and rather than us coming at each other like this. So what I'm trying to get at is in doing that, I'm setting up a trusting relationship with someone who reports to me. I'm not just saying you need to do this. I'm
You're actually
actually
communicating
communicating
and
in a
and
way that
and
encourages her to be
expecting it
truthful
back.
to me. Exactly.
Yeah,
Exactly.
and I think that's, and to me, it's funny because you mentioned the 67%. The first phrase that popped in my head was, "What's our common ground? Where can we meet and then work outward from, or inward, as the case may be? Because you gotta meet people where they're at."
Hmm.
But one of the great things about organizations, and you mentioned this earlier, obliquely in the conversation, is you want people who are mission aligned. And we may have a lot of diversity in terms of how we go about it, but we're all mission aligned. And I think that's really important, because you probably don't want the person in there who's like, "Hey, how can we turn a buck on this?" Whatever their manner of thinking. You don't need, okay, I'm pulling out, dead guys because it's easier and they can't defend themselves. You don't need Steve Jobs to come in, because you're not building a product, and that was his thing, was building these amazing products. But you do need someone who can come in, I'm sure, and make sure that where you're putting your resources is aligned with your mission at the Ford Foundation.
Hmm.
And the same thing with people you bring on board. They almost have to, I think, kind of buy into the idea of what are you trying to do here? What are you trying to support? And I think that's pretty strong common ground, personally. That allows for a lot of what you're talking about, because if we're both pushing toward the same goal, we're pulling the same direction. I think it becomes easier to have those conversations that in a lot of organizations you can't have. My boss comes up and asks me this question. Oh, crud, I better go do this, or she's going to, stomp on me. Versus, can we just talk about it for a second? Maybe is a better way. Maybe I've got a different idea. Maybe you do. Maybe we need to rethink this. But at what point, Diane, do you view that as going from sorting it out genuine curiosity,
Mhm.
to I think what a lot of people are afraid of is that we're spending all of our time doing that instead of actually executing on our mission. Because you had mentioned that earlier too, that, we don't coddle, but we do, have curiosity, if you will, when we lean in.
Yeah.
So how would you kind of balance that out?
But I think that is executing on the mission. I think that in that particular example I just gave you, we ended up with a much better approach than the one I was suggesting
Uh-huh.
and then the one she was suggesting. So we actually came together and we ended up with a product that was much better. So I'll tell you what the issue was. It was I wanted to do training for staff, taking into consideration that we have a global staff, taking into consideration people's workload. I wanted it to be accessible online. I wanted
Uh-huh.
it to be bite sized so that, we're not taking up 6 hours of people's time, so on and so forth. She was looking off the shelf to see what she could find. She couldn't find anything. And it was just taking a long time. And when she told me what the issue was, that she
Uh-huh.
couldn't find anything, and she told me the reasons all the products were not right for us, what we decided was to do it in-house so that we could use the Ford branding. We could make it really real for Ford staff by using
Uh-huh.
Ford examples. So we went from looking for something off the shelf to designing and producing something ourselves that our staff can really appreciate
Uh-huh.
and resonate with.
Awesome. No, I
So it
like that.
was still getting the work done.
Right.
We just took the time to take off the hierarchical hats and just had a conversation about how else can we do this
You mean
and
to be a team.
achieve the goal. Exactly.
I love it.
Yeah.
Well, look, Diane, if somebody wants to dive deeper into this space with you, because obviously I'm sure you've got anecdotes that you could lay out there if we had the time that really dive into a lot of different areas in the space. What's the best way for someone to find you and get in touch?
I'm on LinkedIn. Diane L. Headley. And I'm happy to connect with people on LinkedIn.
Awesome. I appreciate that. I know you and I are connected. So if someone's listening and you're connected to me or want to be connected to Diane, feel free to reach out. I'm happy to help as well. And thanks again to Connex Partners, Diane, for connecting us. I really appreciate the conversation and the connection. And if we get lucky, we'll have a chance to do it again and explore some more stuff. So thanks so much for joining me today.
Thank you for having me. I would love, there's so much more I could say on this topic. I'd love to explore some more.
We'll find some time to have some more fun with this, Diane. Thanks so much.
Thank you. Take care.
Thank you for listening to Inside Human Capital, presented by Connex Partners and Sabretooth.